Imagine a musical nuclear bomb that was supposed to blow up the charts, rewrite the history of pop culture, and make planet Earth stand still in reverent awe. We have two ingredients, each a universe unto itself. Freddie Mercury, the British god of rock, whose voice could shatter walls and make stadiums weep with ecstasy, and Michael Jackson, the American king of pop, the man who had just released Thriller and turned into the most recognizable being in the galaxy. It is the summer of 1983. California is melting from the heat, and the air in the music industry is electrified by rumors that make producers' heads spin. The two titans have met. They didn't just shake hands at a party. They locked themselves in a studio. They are recording a joint album. Can you imagine the scale of this event? It's as if Michelangelo and Da Vinci decided to paint one canvas together. It was supposed to be the greatest duo in human history, a song that would play from every speaker until the end of time. But instead of a triumph, instead of platinum records and a world tour, this story ended in nothing. Silence. Tapes gathering dust in safes for 30 years. Why? You probably think it's all about money, that lawyers couldn't agree on the rights, or that two giant egos couldn't fit in one vocal booth. That's logical. That's boring. And it's an absolute lie. The reason the musical union of the century collapsed has nothing to do with contracts, royalties, or creative differences. The reason Freddie Mercury, a man who had seen everything in this life, fled Los Angeles in a panic, was covered in thick white wool, had 4 legs, and a habit of spitting if it didn't like something. Welcome to Encino, to the Havenhurst estate, the personal fortress of the Jackson family, which in 1983 resembled a surreal amusement park built by a mad child with an unlimited credit card. Freddie Mercury came here to work. He was a professional to the bone. For him, the studio was a temple, a place that smelled of hot amplifier tubes, old coffee, and cigarette smoke. He expected to see a sterile, high-tech sound laboratory where magic is made. He stepped out of the limousine, straightened his signature aviator glasses, ready to show this American wunderkind how real British rockers work. But as soon as the heavy oak doors of the multi-million-dollar recording studio opened before him, Freddie realized he hadn't entered a temple of music. He had entered an episode of the Twilight Zone. First, he heard a sound. It wasn't the sound of a guitar tuning or a vocalist warming up. It was a wet, rhythmic, squelching sound of something tough being chewed. Then his nostrils, accustomed to the scent of expensive colognes and tobacco, caught an odor that didn't belong with the gold records on the walls, the smell of hay, manure, and animal musk. Freddie took another step forward, his eyes adjusting to the dim light of the studio, and he saw something that made him doubt his own sobriety. Right there, in the center of the room, between the solid-state Logic mixing console and the Neumann microphone, stood not a sound engineer, not a producer, and not a backing vocalist. There stood a huge, living, real white llama. This is our dagger, the very absurd detail that pierced the heart of this collaboration. The animal's name was Louis. It stood on an expensive Persian carpet, unperturbed, chewing its cud and staring at the leader of Queen with its huge, moist eyes. You think it was a joke? A prank for a guest? Oh no. Freddie turned his head and saw Michael Jackson. Michael was sitting in the corner, in his glittering jacket, smiling, as if the presence of an Andean artiodactyl in a hermetic recording studio was the most natural thing in the world. "Meet Louis, Freddie," Michael said in his soft, quiet voice. "He's my friend. He loves music. He's staying with us to listen. Ask yourself honestly, what would you have done in Freddie's place? A man who was used to decadence, to parties with dwarves and cocaine, to the madness of rock and roll, but who always, absolutely always, separated work from the circus." Freddie froze. A short circuit was happening in his brain. He looked at the llama. The llama looked at him. He looked at Michael. Michael looked at the llama with adoration. In that second, Freddie realized that the chasm between them wasn't just a difference in musical styles. It was a difference in biological species. He had encountered a world where reality was warped so much that a wild animal was considered a full-fledged critic of a vocal take. But the most terrifying part was that Michael wasn't joking. He was absolutely serious. For Jackson, who built a fairy tale world around himself to hide from the cruelty of reality, Louis was an anchor of safety. But for Freddie, the cynical, earthly, life-hungry hedonist, this animal became a symbol of the madness that began to seep into his work. He felt like an outsider in this triangle: Michael, music, and the llama. And as Louis continued to chomp, breaking the sacred silence of the studio, Freddie Mercury felt his professionalism, his patience, and his desire to record a hit begin to evaporate, replaced by a single desire: to run. To run away from here before this surrealism swallowed him whole. But he didn't yet know that the llama was only the beginning, and that, in the hours to follow, he would have to face things that would turn out to be even stranger than a beast in the studio. Because the real monsters in this house were hiding not in fur, but in the rules of conduct established by the king of pop. To understand why this duo was doomed before the first note was ever recorded, you need to realize that on that day in Encino, it wasn't just two superstars who collided. Two hostile galaxies collided, where the laws of physics were diametrically opposed. Freddie Mercury arrived from a world where excess was the norm, where the air in the studio should be thick with tobacco smoke, and where a bottle of ice-cold Stolichnaya and a mirror with a white line should sit on the mixing console as mandatory attributes of creativity. This was his fuel, his method of revving up his blood, his way of switching from an ordinary man to a rock god. But crossing the threshold of the Jackson mansion, he found himself in a vacuum. There was no smoking here, no drinking here. Even the word sex was under a silent ban, as if it could desecrate the Disney-like purity of the place. Imagine Freddie's physical state. He's in a foreign country, in a house that more closely resembles a monastery for multimillionaires, and his body, used to constant stimulation, begins to demand its due. Michael, this eternal Peter Pan in a gold-embroidered military tunic, flits around offering fresh squeezed juice and showing off his collection of exotic birds. But Freddie doesn't need birds. He needs to ground himself. He needs to feel like a bad boy to start creating. And so, while Michael is distracted by a conversation with the staff, Freddie decides he's had enough of this sterility. He finds an exquisite antique table in the living room, likely costing more than a flat in London, and pulls his travel kit from his pocket, a small mirror, and a rolled-up bill. Do you think this is a typical scene for 80s rock and roll? Certainly, but you forget where this is happening. This isn't a Rolling Stones dressing room. This is the house where Katherine Jackson lives, Michael's mother, the matriarch of the family, a woman whose piety was legendary and bordered on fanaticism. She was a Jehovah's Witness, a person for whom any sin was a direct road to hell. And this is exactly where the Santa Barbara effect kicks in, turning a comedy of errors into a thriller. In the very second Freddie leans over the table, preparing to inhale a bit of London energy, the heavy living room door silently opens. Freddie, possessing animal instincts, froze. He looked up and saw not Michael. He saw an elderly woman with a stern face, looking at him as if she had seen Satan decided to have a snack in her living room. It was Katherine. Time stopped. That ringing silence in which empires crumble hung in the air. What to do? Apologize? Pretend it's powdered sugar? Freddie Mercury, the man who could bring Wembley Stadium to its knees, panicked in that second, like a schoolboy caught with a cigarette in the bathroom. His hand darted across the table, and he did the only thing that came to mind. He covered the mirror with cocaine, with the first magazine lying nearby. The irony of fate reached its peak at that moment, inducing nervous laughter in anyone who knows the context. Do you know what magazine that was? It was the Watchtower, the main religious publication of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Imagine the scene: the king of hedonism hides his sin under a symbol of holiness, right before the eyes of the mistress of the house. Catherine didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her gaze burned right through Freddie. She turned and walked out, taking the remaining oxygen in the room with her. When Michael returned to the living room, he found Freddie sitting on the sofa, pale and nervous. Michael, who sensed people's moods through his skin, immediately realized something terrible had happened. He didn't scream. He didn't call the police. He did something that, for Freddie, was even more unbearable. He started whispering. Michael was terrified that his mother had seen filth, and this fear was transmitted to Freddie. The atmosphere in the house changed instantly. Freddie was no longer a guest and a colleague. He became a virus, a foreign body contaminating the sacred space of Havenhurst. Ask yourself honestly, could you work, create, reveal your soul in a song if you knew that the owner of the house looked at you like a ticking time bomb that could explode and stain the carpets? Freddie felt like a caged animal. His ego, his freedom, his habits, all of it was forbidden here. He was used to the world revolving around him, but in Michael Jackson's world, there was only one center of gravity, Michael himself and his whims. Freddie tried to turn everything into a joke, offered Michael a drink, a way to relax. But Jackson looked at him with his huge, frightened eyes and said, "We don't do that here, Freddie. It's bad for the throat." At that moment, the chasm between them became insurmountable. Freddie realized he wasn't just in a different city. He was on a different planet, where adults behave like children, and children carry the weight of a multi-million-dollar corporation on their shoulders. He wanted to record a hit. He wanted to make history. But instead, he found himself trapped in a Disney nightmare, where behind one door stands a judgmental mother with a Bible, and behind another, in the studio, another trial awaited him for which his psyche, already shaken by the absurdity of it all, was completely unprepared. He thought the cocaine incident was rock bottom, but he was wrong. The real madness lay ahead, in the dark recording room, where Michael had prepared a surprise for him that would finally finish off this union. Have you ever tried to sing while being stared at point blank by a creature evolution designed to chew thorns in the Andes and spit at predators? Freddie Mercury stood in the vocal booth, separated from the rest of the world by thick, soundproof glass, feeling sweat, cold and sticky, trickling down his back under the thin fabric of his tank top. This wasn't the sweat that comes from adrenaline on the Wembley stage when you control the energy of the crowd. This was the sweat of a man trapped in a nightmare and unable to wake up. In the headphones sounded the raw, pulsing rhythm of the song State of Shock, a track meant to become an anthem for a generation, uniting rock and pop into a single monolith. Freddie was a top-tier professional. Give him a microphone, and he would sing even the phone book in a way that would make you weep. He closed his eyes, trying to concentrate, trying to summon that very rage needed for the vocals, trying to forget what happened in the living room with the cocaine and Michael's mother. He drew breath into his diaphragm, ready to deliver his signature, powerful note. But the second he opened his eyes, the magic crumbled to dust, colliding with absurd reality. Right there in front of him, on the other side of the glass, in the inner sanctum of the studio, in the control room where stern sound engineers and producers usually sit, stood Louis. Not a human, a llama, a huge, white, fluffy animal that Michael Jackson had brought with him, as if it were a session musician or a backing vocalist. You think Louis was just standing in the corner? If that were the case, Freddie might have been able to survive it. But no, this is where that same Santa Barbara effect kicks in, turning this scene into a farce. Louis was standing right at the mixing console. His snout hung over faders and buttons worth thousands of dollars, and his jaws moved in a monotonous, hypnotic rhythm, chewing cud made of hay. Michael sat next to the animal. He didn't look at Freddie. He didn't look at the recording levels. He looked at the llama. Every time Freddie finished a phrase, Michael would turn to the beast and, with an absolutely serious, childlike expression, ask, "Well, Louis, did you like it?" Ask yourself, What would you feel in Mercury's place? A man used to working with Brian May, a perfectionist who could make you re-record a single guitar solo for a week for the sake of the perfect sound. And now his judge, his critic, his audience was an artiodactyl. Freddie began to boil. It wasn't just a quirk. It was an insult. He felt that his talent, his time, his reputation, all of it was being sacrificed to the whim of a man-child who had lost touch with reality. Freddie tried again. He gripped the microphone stand so hard his knuckles turned white. "There must be more to life than this," he sang. And the irony of those words written by himself suddenly hit him in the gut. Indeed, there must be more to life than singing for a llama in a dark room in California. But every time there was a pause in the music, in the perfect silence of the studio designed to catch a mosquito's breath, the same sound rang out: chomp, chomp, chomp. That was Louis chewing. This sound penetrated Freddie's brain like Chinese water torture. It drowned out the music in his head. It drowned out his own thoughts. At some point, Michael pressed the talkback button. Freddie expected to hear, "Great take, Freddie," or "Let's try it one more time." But instead, Jackson's soft, whispering voice sounded in the headphones. "Freddie, could you sing a bit quieter? Louis doesn't like harsh sounds, it makes him nervous." And that's when visual silence arrived. That very second was when the world turns upside down. Freddie took off the headphones. He slowly placed them on the music stand. He looked through the glass at Michael, at his glittering jacket, at his glove, and then shifted his gaze to the llama, which stared at him with dull, animal indifference. Inside Freddie, something clicked. It was the sound of the string of patience snapping. He realized that if he stayed here for another minute, he would either go mad or commit murder. He realized that this duo was impossible, not because they were different musicians, but because they lived in different dimensions. For Freddie, music was sweat, blood, and passion. For Michael, it was playing with dolls, where living people and living beasts were just toys in his magic castle. Freddie didn't scream. He didn't throw a scene worthy of a prima donna. He just walked out of the booth, past the stunned sound engineer, past Michael, who didn't even realize what was happening, and past Louis, who continued to chew, oblivious to a legend passing by. Freddie went into the hallway, where the air was slightly less air-conditioned, but free of the smell of manure. He found a phone. His hands were shaking, not from the drugs he wasn't allowed here, but from pure, distilled rage. He dialed the number of his manager, Jim Beach, in London. It was late at night in Britain, but Freddie didn't care. When Jim's sleepy voice answered, Freddie uttered the phrase that went down in rock history as the epitaph for this failed union. He didn't complain about fees. He didn't talk about creative differences. He screamed into the receiver, "Jim, get me out of here. I'm not joking. I'm recording with a llama. Michael is bringing his fucking llama into the studio. I can't work like this. Get me out of here immediately." In that scream was all the pain of genius colliding with madness. Freddie Mercury, a man who could outdrink the entire British Army and outsing an opera diva, surrendered in the face of a herbivore. He fled. He ordered a ticket on the next flight, any flight, just to fly away from this zoo. He left in the studio not just an unfinished song, he left the possibility of creating the greatest album of the 20th century. But at that moment, sitting in a taxi racing to LAX and lighting his first cigarette in hours, he felt not regret, but the relief of a prisoner escaped from a madhouse. He chose the chaos of his life, his leeches in Munich, his parties and his loneliness, because it was an honest human madness, not that sterile, terrifying fairy tale in which Michael Jackson and his silent, chewing friend lived. Freddie saved his sanity, but the price of that salvation was silence, where there should have been music that would have changed the world. As the Concorde's landing gear left the Los Angeles runway, carrying Freddie Mercury away from the California sun, from Disney castles, and from chewing artiodactyls, he ordered a double vodka and tonic, lit a cigarette right in the first-class cabin. It was still allowed for kings of life back then, and exhaled smoke with a relief so profound it was as if he had just escaped a maximum security prison. You probably think that at that moment he felt regret for the missed opportunity, that he sat in his seat looking at the clouds, thinking, God, I just destroyed the most expensive contract in music history. That's logical, that's rational, but that's not Freddie. At that moment he felt only the intoxicating joy of liberation, the very euphoria of a man who escaped a madhouse with his sanity intact. He was returning to his world, the world of Munich, of London, a world where vices were understandable, human, and most importantly, adult. He thought the story with Michael Jackson was over, that those demo tapes would just stay gathering dust in the Encino archives as a curious experiment that no one would ever know about. But this is where the conveyor principle kicks in, refusing to let history die. You can run from a person, but you cannot run from the music you have already created, especially if that music smells of millions of dollars. A year passed. Freddie was busy with his own affairs. Queen were back on top, and life returned to its usual track of chaos and triumph. And then one day, turning on the radio in his limousine, Freddie heard a familiar rhythm, that same pulse, that same hard guitar riff he had sweated over in the Havenhurst studio while Louis chewed hay over his ear. It was the song State of Shock. Freddie's heart skipped a beat. He expected to hear his voice, his harmonies, the magic they had woven together in the darkness of the vocal booth. But instead of his unique, operatic baritone, a completely different sound burst from the speakers, the sharp, barking, recognizable vocals of Mick Jagger. Ask yourself honestly, what does an artist feel when they see their place on the canvas painted over and another figure drawn on top? This was that same Santa Barbara effect that turns everything upside down. Michael Jackson didn't throw the song away. He simply replaced Freddie. He called the leader of the Rolling Stones, a man who was the total opposite of Mercury, the pragmatic, cynical, businesslike Jagger, who didn't ask questions about llamas, didn't snort cocaine on Mama's table, and just came, sang, and left, taking the check. The song became a hit. It thundered from every speaker. But Freddie, listening to it, wasn't angry. He was laughing. It was that bitter, sarcastic laugh of a man who knows a secret. He heard the emptiness in this version. Yes, Jagger was cool. Yes, Michael was flawless. But between them, there wasn't that spark, that electric tension that only arises when two incompatible elements collide. It was a high-quality commercial product, but it lacked the magic of danger, the very kind born in the presence of a llama. And here we come to the climax, to that very intellectual orgasm, when all the seemingly absurd details of this story, the cocaine, the Watchtower magazine, Mama Catherine, and of course, the white llama Louis, come together into a single tragic picture. You think the llama was just a quirk of a spoiled star, a funny anecdote for memoirs. You are deeply mistaken. Louis was a dagger, a symbol that cut reality into before and after. That animal in the studio wasn't just a pet. It was a manifesto of Michael Jackson's loneliness. Look at it through the eyes of a psychologist, not a fan. Michael brought the llama into the studio not because he loved animals more than music. He did it because he feared people. Animals don't judge. Animals don't ask for money. Animals don't sell your secrets to tabloids. Animals don't offer you drugs. For Michael, who lived under a microscope from childhood, Louis was the only being in the room who could be trusted. And Freddie? Freddie was the total opposite. His loneliness was different, loud, screaming, demanding that the void be filled with people, lovers, parties, noise. Freddie ran toward people to forget himself. Michael ran away from people to survive. And when these two types of loneliness met in one room, annihilation occurred. Louis the llama became the wall against which their friendship shattered. For Freddie, The presence of the animal was an insult to his profession, a sign that Michael didn't take him seriously. No, for Michael, Freddie's escape was confirmation of his worst fears. Adults from the real world don't understand me. They are mean. They are dirty. They bring drugs into my mother's house. I'd rather stay with the llama. It was a tragedy of mismatched languages of love and fear. They were both kings locked in their castles, but the bridge between those castles collapsed under the weight of one white llama. And what happened to those demo recordings where Freddie sings? They didn't disappear. They were placed on a shelf in Michael's safe, becoming the holy grail for bootleg collectors. For 30 years, fans passed each other hissing cassettes with pirate copies of State of Shock and There Must Be More to Life Than This, and everyone who heard them understood the world lost more than just a song. The world lost an album that could have changed the trajectory of pop music's development. The version with Freddie sounded raw, but there was life in it. There was a struggle, and you could hear two geniuses trying to outshout each other and outshout the llama. Freddie later released his version of There Must Be More to Life Than This on a solo album, but it sounded lonely, without Michael's response. Michael released his hits. They both continued their paths to the top and to their demise, but in parallel, never crossing paths in work again. That day in Encino became a point of bifurcation. If Freddie had tolerated the llama for a couple more hours, if Michael had removed the animal, if there hadn't been that cocaine on the table, perhaps Freddie wouldn't have gone to Munich, where his illness awaited him. Perhaps Michael would have become a bit more earthly under Freddie's influence. But history does not know the subjunctive mood. Ultimately, this failure became a monument to human fragility. We are used to thinking that great deeds are accomplished in boardrooms or on battlefields, but sometimes the fate of an entire cultural stratum is decided because one person cannot bear the chomping of a llama, and another cannot bear the sight of a mirror with powder. Two geniuses who could have saved each other from loneliness repelled each other like same-pole magnets and flew off in different directions to burn out alone. Jagger got the check and the hit. Michael got his safe world with animals, and Freddie got the freedom to be himself, even if that freedom led him to the grave. But somewhere in a parallel universe, on a tape that is now officially released, their voices still sound together, reminding us of that beautiful and mad summer of 1983, when music lost the battle to zoology, but won the battle for eternity. Today, when you open YouTube and type Freddie Mercury Michael Jackson duet into the search bar, you don't get an official music video with 1 billion views, nor a recording of a legendary performance at Live Aid where they stand shoulder to shoulder, tearing the stadium apart with their energy. Instead, you get only grainy fan edits and static images with overlaid audio extracted from dusty archives 30 years after the death of one and 5 years after the death of the other. You look at these photoshopped fantasies where they sing into one microphone and feel a strange, phantom pain for the loss of something that never was, but was so close you could reach out and touch it. This story about the llama, cocaine, and the fleeing Brit seems like a funny anecdote from the lives of the rich and famous, but if you stop laughing and look at the core, you will see a tragedy of ancient proportions. That escape from Encino became a point of no return, not just for one album, but for two of the greatest fates of the 20th century. You probably think that after that incident, they simply stopped communicating as colleagues whose project didn't work out. That would be too simple, too human an ending, but reality turned out to be far more cruel. They didn't just drift apart. They repelled each other with the force of two same-pole magnets, and that impulse sent each of them into his own personal black hole. Freddie Mercury returned to his world, a world where loneliness is treated with noise, sex, and dangerous connections, and this path led him first to triumph at Wembley, and then to that very dark room in Kensington, where the blue spot of a sarcoma put an end to his biography. Michael Jackson remained in his world, a world where loneliness is treated with high walls, amusement rides, and silent animals, and this path led him to total isolation, court trials, and a lethal dose of propofol in a rented mansion. Ask yourself, what if that day in the studio had gone differently? What if Michael had led Louis the llama to a paddock? What if Freddie had hidden his mirror further away? Perhaps Freddie, with his cynical, earthly humor, would have become the anchor that kept Michael from falling into the abyss of madness, and Michael, with his discipline and perfectionism, would have made Freddie care a bit more about himself. They could have saved each other, because they were the only people on the planet who understood what it was like to carry the firmament of fame on their shoulders. But instead, they allowed their demons and their llamas to stand between them. And here comes that very intellectual orgasm of realization when all the pieces fit into the final mosaic. That white llama was not just an animal, it was a symbol of choice. Michael chose a safe, sterile world of fantasy where no one hurts you, but where there is no real life. Freddie chose a dirty, dangerous, but honest world of reality where there is pain, but also passion. The llama was a border guard on the edge of these two worlds, and it did not let the stranger pass. The song State of Shock, which Mick Jagger eventually sang, became a hit, but it was plastic. It was commerce. But the version where Freddie's voice trembles with tension, trying to outshout a chewing animal, remained lying in a safe as proof that true art is born only in conflict, in friction, in the spark that jumps between incompatible elements. When in 2014, after decades of silence, the Heirs finally released the officially restored tracks, There Must Be More to Life Than This, and State of Shock, the world experienced a shock. We heard more than just music. We heard a dialogue between two ghosts trying to reach each other through time, through death, and through the absurd circumstances of their last meeting. In Freddie's voice on these recordings, you can hear that very power that made the llama nervous, and in Michael's voice, that fragile, glassy purity that Freddie so wanted to protect, but couldn't. It is a requiem for a friendship killed not by betrayal or money, but by the banal inability of two geniuses to accept each other's quirks. We are used to thinking that great unions break up for great reasons, but the story of Freddie and Michael teaches us that sometimes a single awkward moment, one misplaced joke, one extra spectator in the studio, even if that spectator is covered in fur, is enough to change the course of music history forever. They both came out as winners, as legends, but both lost as humans, because that day in Encino, each of them lost the chance to find an equal, a chance to stop being the loneliest person in the room. And now, as we stand on the ruins of this castle in the air, listening to the echoes of voices that will never again sound live, I want to ask you a question that may seem provocative, but it is necessary to understand the nature of genius. We often demand that our idols be perfect. We want them to create masterpieces while behaving like ordinary, normal people. But is that possible? Look at the situation through the eyes of a judge. Who in this story was too complicated? Freddie Mercury, who believed that work in the studio was a sacred process incompatible with a zoo, yet violated the boundaries of decency with his lifestyle in someone else's home? Or Michael Jackson, who created a paradise for himself where he was comfortable, but who required others to play by his mad rules, ignoring professional ethics? Whose side are you on in this conflict of worldviews? On the side of the professional, who fled to preserve his sanity and the quality of the music? Or on the side of the dreamer, who wanted to erase the lines between work and play, but ended up playing alone? Was Freddie an arrogant snob who couldn't tolerate a harmless animal for a great cause? Or was Michael a tyrant in a child's mask who didn't respect his colleagues' time and talent? Write your opinion in the comments, because your choice will show what is more important to you in art: a flawless result achieved with sweat and blood, or a unique atmosphere, even if it smells of hay. I will be waiting for your answers, because in this dispute, There are no right parties, only two types of brilliant loneliness that could never find a common language.